The International Social Worker Scholar-Practitioner Chat is sponsored by Visual Healing Therapeutic Services, PLLC, where your grief matters. Visual Healing Therapeutic Services offers individual grief counseling and grief therapy services. Come along, get the quality grief support you deserve. For more information about their individual grief counseling and grief therapy services, visit www.visualhealingts.com. Hey everybody, my name is Jasmine Cobb. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and council approved supervisor and bereavement specialist. You're listening to the International Social Worker Scholar-Practitioner Chat, where we discuss all things social work at the intersection of thanatology, which simply means the study of death, dying, and bereavement. Today, we're tackling Deathways and the social crisis of mortality in the context of the Western society, the diaspora, and environmental justice. We also have an incredible announcement, and we are soliciting your input, so make sure you stay tuned till the end. The message is growing louder. And the news around the globe, y'all, is we need to make a change. Folks are taking notice that there is a need to find more sustainable ways of disposing the dead bodies of our loved ones. Now, this is a social issue. This is a cultural issue. This is a religious issue. It's a financial issue. It's an environmental issue. And did I mention, globally, it's a problem. It's a problem that's affecting our communities worldwide. I pledge allegiance that I'm doing my job, doing my part here to shed light on this topic because there is a lack of understanding and common ground to join researchers and community workers together to support the communities we reside in. Someone once said, knowledge is power, and without knowledge, the people will perish. It is our duty to support our communities with knowledge so that they may make informed decisions that will be reflected in their attitudes, emotions, and feelings that may require changing traditional religious beliefs and rituals in regard to unsustainable funerary practices. So what does it mean to be a social worker? You may ask, what is our role in this? Well, I can't help but to think about the strengths perspective. We as individuals have the capacity to help ourselves under favorable conditions to grow. One of the main ingredients for growth is having quality support that will enable us to locate and identify our personal and environmental strengths and resources. That is the epitome of the strengths perspective. It's also one of my favorites. Now, we also have to consider empathy. And here's a little self-assessment to determine how well you do relating to others and connecting with those that we serve. Let's think of the stoplight. Red light, green light, yellow light, stop. All right. Obviously, red light means that I got a lot of work to do. Yellow light means I'm doing, but there's room for improvement. And green light means, oh, I'm good to go. And so empathy is multidimensional, but generally what I find is it's usually recalled in the most simplified fashion, juxtaposed with empathy versus sympathy. Now, we can't talk about the strengths perspective without mentioning empowerment, another one of my favorites, a classic. Empowerment is defined in the global definition of social work as one of the major aims of social work, as stated by the International Federation of Social Work and International Association of Schools of Social Work in 2014. It is the liberation and empowerment of people. That's how it's defined by those two organizations. Empowerment, along with the strengths perspective, are the epitome of what we do. Now, let's be clear. Let's not get it twisted. twisted or properly stated, misconstrued, we as social workers don't bestow empowerment upon people. We actually facilitate empowerment through the working relationship. This takes place in every role we serve in, as well as every setting, because we as social workers are often a part of an interprofessional team addressing specific issues. The strengths perspective and empowerment theory are innovative practice perspectives. Both are strengths-based and person-centered. Connectedness. We can't talk about international social work, global social work even within our localities without talking about connectedness, because it is the essence of social work practice. This connection is reflected in every level of social work, micro, macro, and meso, where individuals, families, groups, organizations, and communities are involved. Which brings me to the scholarly article, Cultural Competency, a Cardinal Force in Social Work Practice and Service, a cultural practice guide for human services and the helping professionals, by Dr. Hope Adipo. Dying, death, and bereavement is culturally bound. And this article by Dr. Adipo emphasizes culture and really illuminates the role of culture in the context of grief, loss, and death care. I want to share an excerpt with you here because I want you to bear this in mind as our chat continues to unfold today. I quote, "Culture is a significant factor in human development, sustainability, and societal cohesion. It is greatly cherished and holds universal significance to individuals, groups, families, communities, societies, and nations. Culture affects how a victim, survivor, client, or family responds to life-altering experiences such as domestic violence, child abuse and neglect, sexual abuse, and trauma. It also influences how a client or family deals with loss and grief, resilience, and recovery. Hence, understanding different cultures and cultural practices, symbols, artifacts, the meaning they hold, and respecting and operating within the confines of a set culture is very important. Cultural competency is a key medium through which this need can be addressed. Cultural competency is a core principle that should undergird a social worker's service and practice with clients, as enshrined in the Code of Ethics of the National Association of Social Workers." End quote. Wow. When I came across that excerpt in this article, again, I could not help but to realize how much this really highlights the epitome of the saying and context that grief and loss is culturally bound. It's wrapped all up in our culture. Now, are ethical rules fixed or contextual when we talk about social work in the context of culture, when we talk about communities, when we talk about the individual, when we talk about global versus international in our localities? Another thought-provoking scholarly article that I would like you to consider weighs culturalism and relativism. Social workers in everyday practice frequently face dilemmas regarding equality, ethnicity, religion, or involving tensions over individualism against the claims of the group or community, also known as communalism. We as social workers encounter different cultures with values that may conflict with our own. There will come a time when we struggle with defining when different is just different and when is different wrong. Here's some interesting data. In 2009, it was estimated that annually the death care industry in the United States of America uses, get this, 827,060 tons of embalming chemicals. Do I need to say that again? 827,060 tons of embalming chemicals. Let that sink in. 30 million tons of wood used for coffins. 90,272 tons of steel for caskets. Oh, and brace yourself for this one. 1,636,000 tons of reinforced concrete for vaults and cemeteries. And shout out to Marissa Gonzalez for reporting these stats in her thesis. titled The Green Burial Movement, Reworking the Relationship Between Death and Society at Texas Women University in Denton, Texas. Yes, she is doing the work. Now, I know this source is outside of the last 10 years, but that's exactly the point I want to drive home here. With technology and the world literally changing at the speed of light, I imagine these numbers have continued to climb, and we are still trying to forge a path towards global change today. We have more work to do. I'm just here with you today trying to do my part. Hate it or love it, all the pros of natural burials like biodiversity. Some folks just ain't feeling it. Some believe this burial method detracts from the personalization and memories that come with having a marked grave. Is this a case of you can't please everybody? In a multicultural society and healthy democracy, compromise is a must. This is a complex issue riddled with competing socio-cultural and structural factors. How did we get here, you may ask? How did we arrive at this social mortality crisis? Well, let's take a closer look at Exhibit A, the diaspora. The diaspora is defined as a cultural or regional origin of people who have been geographically displaced. In the context of my culture, think enslavement, the transatlantic slave trade. The thought came to mind as I delved into the research is, where did we go wrong? Was it by relinquishing care of the body that necessitates extended mourning? Before microwave mourning, we used to mourn in a crock pot fashion. Before popcorn mourning, we used to marinate. We used to really take our time with it. Mourning seemed so sacred. What happened to the burial societies that ensured a good burial? The first African American burial society was formed in 1787 in Philadelphia. Shout out to Philly. During Reconstruction, African Americans began adopting and adapting to Western cultural funeral norms. Burial societies' duties shifted from burial to relief. They went from providing aid and care for the dead to nurturing the living through sickness to health. The next major shift would replace the burial societies by the insurance industry. Now, when we talk about international collaboration, we saw it back then. The National Funeral Directors and Morticians Association, also known as the NFDMA, had monthly articles about Pan-African identity and followed the travels of a group of funeral home directors in their travels in Africa. They were encouraging dialogue even back then between Africans and African Americans as a way to hold on to and cement our identity. The National Funeral Directors and Morticians Association was initially established because the National Funeral Directors Association, which of course was a largely white funeral home association, didn't welcome us. They did not welcome Black funeral home members. And so the leadership of the death care industry is still largely separated, like we see some segregation still globally to this day. And this was on a national level back then as well. The National Funeral Directors Association did not integrate its membership until the early 1960s. And, even today, even though the National Funeral Directors and Morticians Association has integrated, it still remains mostly Black. So you still see remnants of colonialism and segregation back then, even holding strong till today. I like to call it the stain. So traditionally, Black funeral homes still continue to serve the Black population, even when the funeral home has been bought out by a large multinational funeral industry conglomerate. And it's evident why there needs to continue to be this conversation about cultural competency training and cultural humility amongst the death industry as well as social workers. The diaspora is imperative within this context because, honestly, a bit of cognitive dissonance surfaced within me. The diaspora affects our sense of belonging because we have been uprooted from our ancestral land. I can't help but to think we must have had it right once upon a time before it came to this. In African culture, it was important to be laid to rest within your community of origin. Prior to modern technology, we may do somehow with burials, and I believe it's what we are referring to today as green. Green burials aren't a new concept. There's been an evolution. Historically, embalming has taken place since the ancient Egyptian era. Black Union soldiers learned the trade of embalming during the Civil War. African Americans assimilated and were influenced by the successful service leadership business model in the funeral industry. This shifted the paradigm of our cultural roots of collectivism and being community-minded to self-help and individualism. What's also phrased as rugged individualism. And you know that African proverb, it takes a village? That's where I come from. Colonization was about profits. Service leadership in the death care industry had Christian undertones. It promoted what W.E.B. Du Bois called self-help. We saw the humanity in death and dying transform before our eyes into being all about business and profit. It proved to be a successful business model within the African American funeral home, so you can't really knock them, and if you can't beat them, join them. Embalming the deceased generally means that visitation will be held in addition to the funeral service, which leads to other funeral goods and services being added on. In other words, profit. Visitation requires embalming, funeral home rental, purchase of a casket or rental casket for the viewing, transportation from the funeral home or the church to the graveyard, and refrigeration of the body. Did you know embalming can cost $2,000 to $3,000, and funerals that opt to embalm are considered the most profitable? This is likely why in many cases the bereaved aren't explicitly made aware that it's optional and not mandatory. I can attest to that. Funeral homes typically consider embalming the cornerstone of a funeral package. In African American communities, there's a tendency to memorialize the body at funerals, which is in contrast to white communities that lean toward cremation or green burials. In the midst of mourning, bereaved families tend to purchase expensive funeral packages, upgrading funeral goods and services like expensive caskets and even casket add-ons. They find themselves investing money into their loved one's death where they might have put the same money towards their loved one's life. Personally, I'm vocal and choose to share certain aspects about my own recent experience and involvement with death care. I was privileged to contribute to an article published by Forbes concerning the 2023 report on the cost of dying released by Empathy. Empathy is an organization that helps people manage the logistics and emotional burdens of death. The report includes results from a survey conducted with nearly 1,500 people who had lost an immediate family member in the prior 5 years. They found, on average, direct costs related to the death of a loved one can reach upwards of $20,000, not factoring in lost income from taking time off or healthcare costs required to manage health and mental health symptoms. Participants reported that they paid an average of $3,600 to the funeral home, which was actually lower than the 2021 national median cost of roughly $7,800 reported by the National Funeral Directors Association. Burial plots cost participants an estimated average of $1,800, and smaller expenses like catering, officiants, flowers, music, and invitations can add more than $1,700 combined, making the funeral the single biggest expense associated with the loved one's death. And we'll just stop there. But just so you know, the tab kept going up. To review the full article, stop by our website to read the full report. The Wall Street Journal also reports that federal statistics point to high mortality rates among young Blacks. And industry surveys show that most Blacks reject low-cost cremations in favor of high markup burials, which has made them a vulnerable target to the insidious greed of the death care industry. The African American death care industry is often overlooked and understudied even in academia academia, like most cultural aspects of Black life, Black deathways matter. Historians and researchers of death in the United States write about the white experience as a dominant cultural experience, but we must strive and continue to uncover the diversity of American history. Much of the published work today on death care in the United States is one-sided and written primarily from a white and mostly Protestant perspective. The African American experience is a core part of American death culture. The U.S. Health and Human Services of Minority Health reports African Americans today have the highest mortality rate of any racial and ethnic group for all cancers combined. The death rates for all major causes of death are higher for Blacks than for whites. And African American babies have an infant mortality rate twice that of non-Hispanic whites. To quote Claudia Rankin, "The condition of Black life is one of mourning." Do not despair, my friends. I've always been a firm believer of the saying, where there's a will, there's a way. If you thought our journey together thus far has been a thrill, just wait. There's more to come on green burials and the path forward towards environmental justice. Thank you all for joining in today. I'm Jasmine, licensed clinical social worker, council approved supervisor, and bereavement specialist. You've been listening to the International Social Worker Scholar-Practitioner Chat, where we discuss all things social work at the intersection of thanatology, which simply means the study of death, dying, and bereavement. Check out our Instagram at Visual Healing TS to stay connected with us and for details on our upcoming episodes. And if you could, take a minute to email or message your comments about our show, any questions that you have or feedback, we really appreciate it. The International Social Worker Scholar-Practitioner Chat is sponsored by Visual Healing Therapeutic Services, PLLC, where your grief matters. Visual Healing Therapeutic Services offers specialty support services relating to grief, loss, and bereavement. For more information about their individual grief counseling and grief therapy services, visit www.visualhealingts.com today.